Turkish chicken kebabs. That's right, I said chicken kebab, not chicken kebab. When I think kebab, I think chunks of overcooked meat separated by pieces of undercooked vegetable, and so I'm not really into those. But this kebab, on the other hand, is all meat all the time, and I think far superior. And as you can see from this total spoiler of a picture, we're still going to be getting our veggies, so don't worry. And like almost all my favorite grilling recipes, this thing features big flavors with a very small amount of effort. So let's go ahead and get started with the marinade. So for that, we are going to need some Turkish-style yogurt, which you probably can't find. But what you can find in every supermarket is Greek yogurt, so we'll use that. And then to that, we'll add some olive oil, along with some freshly squeezed lemon juice. And do I need to keep telling you that? Is anyone not using fresh lemons? I mean, unless you work at some kind of weather station in Antarctica, you really don't have an excuse. And then we want to do a little touch of tomato product. I believe in the original recipe it called for tomato paste, but because I'm an American, I reserve the right to use ketchup, which really does work beautifully. We're also going to want a large amount of minced garlic, as well as a generous amount of kosher salt, and of course its good friend, freshly ground black pepper. We're also going to spice this up with some chili flakes, and I'm using Aleppo chili flakes, because it is from the Middle East, so it seems appropriate, but any hot chili flake will work. And then we'll finish off our seasonings with a little bit of paprika, as well as some ground cumin, and then last but not least, everybody's favorite secret ingredient, cinnamon. And then let's take a whisk and give this a mix. And this will be the perfect time to admit I'm not really sure how Turkish this recipe is. I don't really do a lot of research, or any research, but I am basing this on a Turkish lamb marinade that I've used for years. Plus, we've never called anything Turkish before, so that's what I went with. But anyway, like I said, we'll mix that up, and once that's set, we'll simply set that aside and move on to the chicken. And I'm going to be using boneless, skinless chicken thighs for this. Why anyone would want to do this with chicken breasts is beyond me. But having said that, you are the kebab of your kebab, so you use whatever you want, but I am going with the thighs. And you can, if you want, certainly use these chicken thighs whole, but I generally like to cut them in half. I think it works out a little better. So as you can see, I'm going to split these pieces in two, and then once our thighs have been cut up, we can go ahead and toss that in the marinade, but not all at once. All right, I'm sure you've heard me say this before, but chicken thighs are famous for all their nooks and crannies. So if we just dump it all in at once and try to mix it up, there may be some nooks and or crannies that don't get enough marinade. So I do take an extra minute and make sure each piece is getting thoroughly coated. And once we are confident that's happened, we will wrap that up, and we'll let that marinate in the fridge from anywhere between 2 and 8 hours. So ideally, I like to do this the morning of the day we're going to grill. But yes, you can leave it overnight. But when it comes to yogurt-based marinades, I'm always a little scared to let them go too long. So I'm recommending 2 to 8 hours, after which we can pull it out and begin the impaling process. And I'm going to use some metal skewers for this. And not just one. We're going to use 2 metal skewers per kebab. And that's going to give us increased stability and a little better maneuverability on the grill. And of course, because we are using 2 skewers, we've basically doubled the chances you will accidentally give your hand the old poka-poka. So be careful as you're doing this. And please note how we're putting these on here. Okay, we're doing them a flat way, kind of side to side, so that we can fit a lot more meat onto one kebab, which is going to give us this nice, thick, gorgeous log of chicken, as opposed to just a few chunks. And I really didn't do any trimming to these chicken thighs, but if you do see a little piece of anything weird, go ahead and pull it off. And the other nice thing about stacking these kind of side to side like this is not only are we going to get a larger mass of meat to grill, which means more caramelization on the outside and a more tender, juicy inside, but we've also created tons of cracks and crevices, which are going to help absorb all that beautiful smoky flavor from the grill. And once those are set, we'll just clean up our plate a little bit, and of course our hands, and any surface that touched raw chicken. And if you want, you can just wrap this up and leave it in the fridge until your grill is ready. But mine was ready. So I'm going to head out back and toss these on a charcoal grill. And one huge tip here. Yogurt-based marinades are incredible, but they love to stick. So do not even think of turning this over for at least 3 or 4 minutes. All right, we need some serious crustification first. Otherwise, you may tear your chicken. So I let mine go for, like I said, at least 3 or 4 minutes until I could kind of feel it was releasing from the grill, at which point we'll flip that over. And even though it may stick a little bit here and there, that's not too bad. And then the same drill for the other side, basically. Let it go for 3 or 4 minutes before you try to turn it, and then after that, all bets are off. You can continue to cook that, flip it around as you see fit, until it reaches your desired level of doneness. And to be safe, I'm going to suggest you use a thermometer. And one nice thing, because we did line up that chicken side by side, we have a little more room for error than your traditional chicken kebab, which are usually just smaller chunks of chicken, which really can overcook quickly. So if you do happen to leave these on a couple extra minutes, you should still be pretty good. And by the way, you know when the tiny scraps that are attached to the grill taste awesome, that this is going to be good. But anyway, like I said, we will cook that to our desired level of doneness, at which point we'll head back inside and transfer these on to our platter. And I like to transfer it right onto some lavash. I mean, why have those amazing juices dripping on the platter when they could be soaking into something we can eat? And then, of course, as they say, man cannot live by chicken and bread alone. So we're going to go ahead and surround this with some very delicious and appropriate garnishes, which, as you can see, includes cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, some parsley and onions, as well as some fresh lemon. And that Turkish chicken kebab platter is done. You know I'm no food stylist. I prove that almost every video. But this really is something that takes very little effort to make look gorgeous. And at this point, there's nothing left to do except to de-skewer these and eat. And man, is it succulent. Forget the amazing flavor from all those spices. There's something about a yogurt-based marinade that just makes the best grilled meat. It just comes out so moist and tender, just absolutely gorgeous. And if you want, you can eat this in big chunks, dinner plate style. But what I like to do is kind of chop it up a little bit and use it in what I call a Turkish taco. And what that is a piece of lavash I've warmed on the grill, and I'll swipe that with a little bit of hummus before topping it with some chicken, and then we'll go ahead and garnish with some cucumber and some tomato and some onion and parsley, of course. And then I think the best way to finish this is with a spoon of cold yogurt sauce. Our tzatziki sauce would be perfect here, although apparently I'm supposed to pronounce it tzatziki, but that feels awkward. But what doesn't feel awkward is to finish this with an extra pinch of chili flakes, and we'll roll that up. And that, my friends, is something you definitely want to eat. Just such an incredibly delicious bite of food. And by the way, I've been experimenting with some new voice-activated lavash. Check this out. I say open. Huh. Oh, you know what? I'm using the wrong line. Open sesame. There we go. That's better. But anyway, all kidding aside, this really did come out fantastic. And for a technique that's so simple, it really does produce beautiful, delicious grilled chicken. So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with grilled Greek chicken. That's right, I like my Greek chicken like I like my Greek weddings, big and fat. And of course, I'm referring to the flavor, as the chicken pieces we're using are the same size as usual. But when it comes to how incredibly tasty this is, big and fat is a perfect way to describe the flavors. And the key to this whole operation is the marinade, which is going to be the first step. And basically the strategy here to achieve these big fat flavors is to use a ton of everything. So instead of adding a couple cloves of crushed garlic to this bowl, we'll add like 6 or 7 cloves. And instead of 1 small spoon of dry oregano, we'll add 2 giant spoons. Okay, so a ton of garlic and oregano are the co-stars in this marinade. But we're also going to put in a very generous spoon of hot pepper flakes, as well as a ridiculously large amount of freshly ground black pepper. And that's going to do it for our dry ingredients. But of course, we also need some wet ones. So we'll go ahead and add a whole bunch of freshly squeezed lemon juice. Do not, under any circumstances, use concentrate. I'm going to need you to squeeze, please. I also think we should add a little splash of white distilled vinegar so as to increase the acidity without changing the flavor. And then we'll go ahead and finish up with some extra virgin olive oil, and we will whisk all that together. And as soon as that's mixed up, we are now the proud owners of one of the world's simplest, but most intensely flavored marinades ever invented. So we'll whisk that up and set it aside, and then once that's set, we can move on to prep our chicken. And because I'm going to be using these leg thigh quarters, we want to make a few slashes in these before they hit the marinade, using the old 2 in the thigh, 1 in the leg method, which means we'll cut the thigh twice, through the skin down to the bone about 1 inch apart, as well as do the same thing once through the thickest part of the leg. And what these 3 slashes are going to do is not only let this cook a little quicker and more evenly, but it's also going to allow our marinade to get in there a little better. Okay, so we'll go ahead and prep those leg thigh sections as shown, at which point we're going to salt both sides very generously. And the reason I'm showing you this technique versus just throwing the salt into the marinade is because that kind of throws people off sometimes. Because they're never sure exactly how much to put, as well as marination times can vary. So one technique I like that helps people visualize how much to put is to very generously apply kosher salt to both sides, as we would if we were seasoning these to do without a marinade. And that way, theoretically, when we combine this with the marinade, we have enough salt. even though I usually sprinkle a little on the skin before I grill it. This is going to get us very, very close. So we'll go ahead and salt that very enthusiastically on both sides before combining it with our marinade. Speaking of which, funny story. I would normally mix this all up in a big bowl and just let it marinate in there in the fridge, tossing it once in a while. But every time I do that, I get emails saying, why don't you use a plastic bag? It's so much easier and you don't have to toss the chicken around. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to throw those people a bone and use a bag this time. Except that the kitchen gods have a sense of humor. So they made sure my bag sprung a leak, which forced me to get upset and dump it into a bowl like I planned on originally. So basically, the moral of the story is never try anything anyone tells you. Remember that, kids. So anyway, I ended up mixing that very thoroughly in this bowl. And one thing I like to do once I'm confident those are all coated is turn them so the skin side's up and the flesh side is down in that marinade before I refrigerate them, so that more of that meat is sort of sitting in the marinade. And I'm not sure if that makes a difference, but it might, so I do it. And then what we'll do once our chicken is situated and wrapped is let that marinate in the fridge for at least 4 hours or up to overnight. Which personally for me I find a little too long. For me the sweet spot is about 6 to 8 hours, which is how far I let this go. And as you can see, I like to lay it down on a paper towel lined sheet pan, just to sort of let it drain for a few minutes. And then even though, as we discussed, I salted this earlier, I do like to add a little sprinkling to the skin side before heading to the grill. Oh, and I just remembered, don't throw away any excess marinade. Okay, towards the end of grilling, we can always use that to baste the chicken if we want. So we'll hang on to that. And assuming our coals are ready, we'll head outside and throw this on a charcoal grill. And we'll go ahead and set those down into some kind of visually pleasing arrangement. And as usual with these grilling videos, I can't really tell you how to do it so much as I can tell you what I did. Alright, there's just so many variables with the different types of grills and different amounts of heat. But I can give you the following advice, and that's not to use too hot of a fire. Alright, it really doesn't do us much good if the outside's beautifully brown and crusty, and yet the inside is still raw because the surface cooked too fast. Okay, don't let all that smoke fool you. I don't really like to use a lot of intense heat here. So instead of grilling chicken, it's almost more like we're roasting the chicken on the grill. So my general strategy is to go about 6 or 7 minutes with the skin side down, and then I'll flip them over and give the other side about the same time. And then from that point on, I like to play with my food. I know that's frowned upon, and you're only supposed to turn stuff once. But with all due respect, that's crazy. So if I want to flip it back over to the skin side again to get a little extra caramelization, what are they going to do about it? I mean, we are, after all, the Charles Dickens of our Greek grilled chickens. And by the way, yes, if you say please, you can have more later. But anyway, like I said, once I have both sides browned, I kind of move the stuff around as I see fit until I've determined it's cooked enough. And of course, we can use internal temperature to check for doneness, but usually I just go by look and feel. So right here, they were getting pretty close, but I decided to give them another couple minutes. Plus, I remembered I saved that extra marinade. So I went ahead and brushed that over, and I let these cook for another 3 or 4 minutes. Which reminds me, you have to do that if you're using marinade that had raw chicken in it. Okay, we would never want to put that on and then serve the chicken immediately. So like I said, I let mine cook for another few minutes, until that brushed on marinade as well as the chicken itself were done, at which point I decided to pull these off. And I'm not going to lie, these probably could have used another 5 minutes or so, but the sun was going down and the light was perfect, so I decided to stop while I was ahead. And that, my friends, if you don't mind me saying myself, is one gorgeous plate of grilled Greek chicken. In fact, it would be impossible for that to look any better. Unless we did this. Served it on some wonderfully colorful diced cucumber, tomato, and onion. And not only is that going to be nice to look at, but it's also going to provide a textural and temperature contrast between the hot smoky chicken and the cool crisp vegetables. Did I just say vegetables? And then from there I went full food stylist, with not only a placemat and a sprig of oregano, but also a clear bowl of lemon wedges. And that's it, our grilled Greek chicken is ready to serve. So I went ahead and plated up, and decided to serve this with a little bit of spicy yogurt, which as you can see I dusted with a little bit of cayenne. At which point it was time to grab a fork and knife and try a piece, or attempt to. As you longtime viewers know, I can't eat on camera, and the knife hit the bone on this first cut, but I quickly panicked and awkwardly hacked off a little piece, which I tasted without the yogurt to get the full effect, and it was absolutely magnificent. As I mentioned earlier, this is just one of the tastiest, most intensely flavored grilled chicken recipes in existence. And while optional, I really do enjoy that creamy tanginess of the yogurt sauce, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to tell you how to make on the blog. But anyway, that's it. How I do what I'm calling grilled Greek chicken, which is kind of a generic name for something that tastes so special. But anyway, calling it grilled Greek chicken works for me, since everybody knows how delicious Greek food is. And they'll assume the same is going to be the case with this, which it will be. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with grilled garlic and herb shrimp. That's right, don't let the generic name fool you. This is one of the finest grilled seafood recipes in all the land. And since we just showed you how to plant your own herb garden, I thought we'd post a video that really illustrates how awesome it is to have those fresh herbs around. So let's go ahead and get started with the marinade, where we'll be using 4 of those herbs. We're going to go with some basil, some oregano, and I have 2 kinds, Greek and Italian. And we're also going to do some Italian parsley and some lemon thyme. Oh man, is that stuff good on grilled seafood. And above and beyond the fresh herbs and garlic, one of the real secrets to this recipe is to use a mortar and pestle to make the marinade. And I'll go into detail about this amazing tool on the blog. But for now, let's just go ahead and prep these herbs for processing. And all that's going to entail is taking the leaves off the stems, which is very easy for everything other than the thyme, which does take a minute or 2 to strip those little leaves off. And yes, when you first start your career as a prep cook in a kitchen, picking thyme leaves is one of the first jobs they give you, because everybody hates to do it. But it really isn't that bad, and when you taste these, the effort will be well worth it. So we'll go ahead and we'll pick our herbs, at which point we can move on to making the rest of this mixture. So first up, into the mortar, we're going to place some kosher salt, followed by just a little bit of lemon zest, and then more than a little sliced garlic. That was about 3 cloves. And what we'll do before we add our herbs is give this a little crushing first. So we'll grab the pestle and we'll give this the old smasha. And we don't really need to go too fine. We just want to get this started. So go ahead and pound that until you have something that looks like this. And at this point, we can add in our herbs, but not like this. Very critical, we're going to have to cut them up a little bit first. Just start with the biggest basil leaves and kind of use those to wad everything together. And once we have a nice tight package, we can take a sharp knife and slice across this way, and then the other way. And we'll give that a little chop. And it may seem a little odd that we're chopping this before crushing it, but it only takes a couple seconds and really does work a lot better. So we will add in our herbs, and we will give that a crushing. And I'm not going to stop the camera here, but at home, all that herb you see flying out, you're going to want to put back in. And I believe I mentioned earlier that the mortar and pestle is kind of key here, and it really is. While you can get something that looks similar to this with a food processor or a blender, you'll just never be able to achieve the same flavor. So in other words, if you want to crush this, you have to crush this. But anyway, we're going to crush those herbs into that garlic mixture until we have something pretty fine. I mean, we're not going for a total paste here, but basically something that looks like this. At which point we can add the last ingredient, the olive oil. But we're not going to add all of it. We're just going to start with a drizzle, and we'll mix that in first before adding the rest. And the reason is when you're working with a mortar and pestle, the rule of thumb is the thicker the mixture, the easier it is to crush. So we'll just start with a little splash, and we'll grind all that together for about a minute. And once it's been crushed to about this point, we can stop and add in the rest. And as you can see, I'm also switching to the freakishly small wooden spoon. And basically, we're just adding in enough oil to achieve the proper thickness, which I think should be right about here. And believe it or not, that's it. Our garlic and herb marinade is done. So we'll set that aside while we go ahead and grab our shrimp. And what we have here is a couple pounds of peeled and deveined 1620s, which are the size I'm recommending here. And all 1620 means is that's how many come to a pound. So in my opinion, for this recipe, the bigger the shrimp, the better. And at this point, we want to coat our shrimp with our herb mixture, but not all of it. We only want to add in 2/3 at this point. We must save 1/3 to finish the dish with. So we just want to transfer in about 2/3 of that mixture, and then we'll grab a spoonula or something similar and give this a very, very thorough mixing. All right, shrimp are famous for their nooks and crannies. So you really do want to make sure you get in there and get in there good until these are all perfectly coated. And then once that's set, what we'll do is we'll transfer that into a plastic bag because we want to let these marinate in the fridge for at least a couple hours. And of course, you want to transfer this in carefully so you don't spill anything. Whoops. But anyway, we'll transfer that into a zip-top bag and transfer that into the fridge for 3 hours. And what if you go for a little less or a little more? It'll probably be fine. And we will also wrap up the last third of that marinade because we're going to need that for later. Of course, plastic wrap does not stick to wood, which is why I like to steal those little shower caps from hotels and motels and use that instead. But that's another video. So like I said, we're going to let our shrimp marinate for about 3 hours, at which point those are ready to skewer. And I will be using the metal ones for these, but some soaked bamboo skewers will also work. And we will use the standard once through the small part, once through the big part method, which is pretty basic. I would be lying if I said skewering shrimp was hard. And I'm going to do 4 of these because apparently I only have 4 skewers. But don't worry, I'll cook those later. So our shrimp have been skewered, and at this point they're ready to cook. And I highly recommend you do that on a very, very hot charcoal grill. What about gas grills? Not a big fan. But anything hot will work. And the reason I want a very, very hot fire is because I'm going for some serious caramelization. Oh, I've never met a grill mark I didn't like. So a lot of grilled shrimp recipes recommend medium heat, but that is not me. I want very intense heat, very close to the shrimp. But anyway, I cooked those for a few minutes per side until they were just barely cooked through and looking awesome, at which point we'll pull those off the grill. And if everything's gone according to plan, you should be looking at one of the most beautiful platters of grilled shrimp you've ever seen. And at this point, we're ready to serve, but wait. We have one last step to do. We have to take that third of the herb mixture we saved and use that to make a quick sauce to go over the top. So let's go ahead and transfer the rest of that mixture into a mixing bowl, to which we'll add some red pepper flakes. I'm using Aleppo pepper, but just red chili flakes will work. I'm also going to give it a little pinch of cayenne. You know that's good for you. As well as some freshly squeezed lemon juice. And one last drizzle of olive oil. Then we'll take a whisk and we'll give that a mix. And in just a few short seconds, you're going to be looking at a very gorgeous and incredibly delicious sauce to finish our shrimp with. So let's go ahead and spoon that over our shrimp, which as you can see have been transferred to a more geometrically appropriate platter. And we will spoon that over. And seriously, how good does that look? And then we finish these off with a few wedges of lemon. And right as I did, the light from the setting sun started being filtered through our neighbor's windblown tree, which caused the light to flicker, which when it comes to photography is a huge problem. But when it comes to everything else, the opposite of that. So I just went with it, and instead of being annoyed, I decided to enjoy it. So I went in for the official taste, and these really were magnificent. Just such a perfect combination with that sweet, caramelized, smoky shrimp, that fresh, aromatic brightness of the herb, and of course a big punch of garlic. And obviously, if you want to use some different herbs, go ahead. So things like dill or tarragon would also be beautiful in this. But of course, that's up to you. You are the peaches of your herbs, so use whatever you like. But anyway, that's it, grilled garlic and herb shrimp. So delicious, so simple, so easy, especially if you have all those herbs growing for free in your backyard. All right? So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with grilled German potato salad. That's right, we're going to make a potato salad using grilled potatoes, which I'm sure comes as a huge disappointment to the people that thought we were going to make a German potato salad and then grill it, which is not the case. You only make that mistake once. But anyway, if you're still watching, this really did come out amazingly well. And to get this started, what we'll do is grill some potatoes until tender. And I say grill, but what we're really going to do is roast these on the grill. And to accomplish that, what we'll do once these are down is go ahead and close the cover. And we'll try to keep our heat about the same as we'd use in the oven if we were roasting these. I'm thinking something around 375 would be perfect. And what we should probably do every once in a while these are roasting is go ahead and give them a flip. And by the way, as far as timing goes, I'm doing this on a grill I cooked chicken on earlier, and I'm basically using up those leftover coals. And then we could either serve this later with another meal, or make it ahead for the next day. But let's say you're doing something like a brisket or a pork shoulder that takes a long time. You could actually do these potatoes while that's cooking, and make this to go alongside it. But regardless, we will go ahead and roast these until just tender, which is almost impossible to gauge by time, since potatoes are going to come in all different shapes and sizes. So what we'll do to check these is test them with a wooden skewer. And what we're shooting for, like I said, is something that's just barely tender. Okay, we don't want soft and falling apart, but we really, really, really don't want undercooked. All right, there's literally nothing worse than a potato salad with undercooked potatoes. So as soon as these are just barely tender as tested with a skewer, we'll go ahead and pull those off. And then we will bring those inside and let them sit until they're cool enough to handle. And by handle, I mean eventually we will peel them and slice them. And while those are cooling, we should have just enough time to make our hot bacon dressing, which we will start by adding a whole bunch of sliced bacon to this cold dry pan. And we will set that over medium heat. And we're going to want to cook that bacon until crisp, or very close to it. And by the way, there's good fondants, there's great fondants, and then there's bacon fondants. So if you're using a stainless steel pan, you should notice a very substantial buildup of that caramelized goodness on the bottom, which once deglaze is going to add a ton of flavor to our dressing. But anyway, we'll go ahead and continue to cook on medium. And one great visual clue you're getting close is that grease in the pan starts to appear a little bit foamy. All right, so when your pan starts to look like this, your bacon is probably getting very close to the perfect crispiness. And if so, what we'll do is grab a slotted spoon and we will remove exactly half. And as you'll see, we'll use that to top our salad later. But in the meantime, what we'll do is add a diced onion to the bacon left in the pan, along with, of course, all that rendered bacon fat. And what we'll do is continue to cook this on medium until our onions turn translucent and sort of soften up a little bit. And since that's probably going to take about 5 minutes or so, what we can do while that's happening is go ahead and peel and slice our potatoes, which by now should be cool enough to handle. And I should mention the peeling's optional, but that skin really does come off quite easily, especially after you've grilled them. So I'm going to go ahead and peel that off, and then cut this potato in half lengthwise, and then eventually into quarters. And then as per usual, we'll turn that and cut across into whatever thickness slices we want. And I'll generally shoot for something between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. Okay, if they're too thin, they're going to turn into mashed potatoes when we mix them with the dressing. And if they're too thick, the dressing won't penetrate as well. But anyway, that's going to be up to you. I mean, you guys are, after all, the Donny Deutsches of these kinds of choices. But what you're seeing here is what I think personally is the optimum size. And that's it. We'll transfer those potatoes to a mixing bowl, where they are now ready to be drenched with our soon-to-be finished dressing. So we'll head back to the stove where by now our onions should be done. And then once we've determined our onions have cooked long enough, we'll go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients, which will include some white sugar, or as I've started to call it, the devil's salt. And then we're also going to need some actual salt, and its good friend freshly ground black pepper. And we'll finish up our seasonings with a little bit of cayenne pepper, or cayenne pfeffer, as they call it back in the old country. And then to finish this up, we will go ahead and add enough white vinegar, specifically in my case champagne vinegar, to perfectly balance the bacon fat in the pan. And how much vinegar you need exactly depends, of course, on how much bacon fat you have in the pan. But for the 1/2 pound of bacon I'm using, I find about 1/2 cup is perfect. And what we'll do is stir that in. And of course, that's going to deglaze whatever goodness is left on the bottom. And at this point, we can go ahead and raise our heat to medium-high. And then all we're going to have to do to finish this dressing is simply wait for it to come to a boil. And that's it. As soon as it starts bubbling, we'll give it a stir and turn off the heat. And our hot bacon dressing is now officially ready to use. And yes, you can absolutely make this ahead of time and reheat it. But I want grilled German potato salad now. So let's go ahead and pour that over our potatoes. And then we'll go ahead and give that a toss to combine. And what I like to do after giving it this first initial tossing is let it sit for 5 minutes and give it one more mixing. At which point we can add the final ingredient, some freshly chopped Italian parsley. And by giving it a couple mixings and letting it sit for a little bit before we add this, I think our parsley might stay a little greener. But anyway, we will mix in our fresh parsley. And that's it. Other than giving this a taste for salt, I think we're done. So I went ahead and took a little taste. And I'm happy to report it was perfect. Which means we can go ahead and serve this up into something a little more presentable. And we'll go ahead and garnish the top with a little extra parsley, as well as, of course, our reserved crispy bacon. And then, for no apparent reason, a little extra parsley. And that's it. What I'm calling grilled German potato salad's done. And ready to enjoy, hopefully while still warm. And why that's kind of a big deal is because cold bacon fat will coat your palate, and it will not taste as good. Which, by the way, is why it works so well for summer cookouts, since unlike most other potato salads, this actually gets better sitting in the sun. And then as far as the taste goes, we have a beautiful balance between sweet and tangy, which may not sound like it works incredibly well with potatoes. But when you include all that beautiful smoky bacon, it really does work beautifully. But what really takes us up to the next level is that subtle smokiness from the potatoes. So I really did thoroughly enjoy this. Although I did decide I probably should stop eating out of the bowl. And I plated some up next to some burnt chicken so I could take a few more bites. And by the way, that wasn't really burnt. That was from a koji rub chicken experiment I mentioned on Twitter a while back. That, as you can see, I'm still perfecting. But anyway, that's it. Grilled German potato salad. Whether you're one of these people that just doesn't like mayonnaise, or maybe you need a potato salad that can sit on a sunny picnic table for like 4 hours without making anyone sick, or neither of those things, and you're just looking for an intensely delicious potato salad, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy. Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with barbecued pork skewers. That's right, when you're in the mood for barbecued pork, you basically have two options. All right, you got your barbecued ribs, or you can have a nice slowly smoked pork shoulder that's then usually made into pulled pork. But what if we're in the mood for something different? Well, in that case, these barbecued pork skewers come highly recommended. And no, we're not just sticking chunks of pork on a stick. This is way more advanced and way more delicious, as I hope you find out. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by prepping our pork. And what I'm going to be using today is about a 2-pound piece of pork shoulder that I'm first going to cut in half lengthwise, after which I'm going to cut across these pieces into nice thin slices. And if you're not into the much richer, much fattier pork shoulder, you can definitely use this exact same technique for pork loin, which will in fact give you a more tender product. But while it's going to take a little longer to cook, and will definitely be a little bit chewier, by using pork loin, I think I'm going to end up with something that's definitely more flavorful. So ultimately, what cut of pork you use is going to be up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the Troy McClure of your barbecued pork skewer. So you decide, but no matter what you go with, make sure you slice it nice and thin, like at least 1/8 of an inch. And then what we'll do once all that's been successfully sliced is transfer that into a mixing bowl and add the rest of our ingredients, which for me is going to include 1 large grated garlic clove that we could mince or crush or smash instead. But when you grate it on a microplane like this, you're pretty much pulverizing every cell, and you're releasing a ton of intense garlic flavor. And then the same goes for this 1/4 onion I'm going to add. All right, I'm going to grate that also, although on a larger cheese grater. And don't be a hero. This is not worth losing a knuckle or a fingernail over. So when you get down to that little last piece, just stop and chuck that into your compost. Or just toss it in the bowl. I should have tossed it in the bowl. Why didn't I toss it in the bowl? And then to those volatile vegetables, we will add some classic barbecue dry rub ingredients, such as brown sugar. How come you taste so good? And then we will definitely also need some salt. And the rule of thumb here is about 1 teaspoon of kosher salt per pound of meat. We will also add some freshly ground black pepper, as well as some paprika, and then a touch of ground cumin. And then last but never least, some cayenne pepper. And that's it. Once everything's in, we'll give this a very thorough mix. And there are 2 ways you can do this, with your hands and the wrong way. All right, there is just nothing that's going to be as effective mixing this as your hands. All right, since that's going to be like mixing this with 10 little fleshy spatulas. And yes, I promise to never use the term fleshy spatulas again. And while it does take a few extra minutes to slice, by having our meat cut nice and thin like this thing's going to have a much deeper and uniform seasoning than if we had just seasoned the outside of a bunch of bigger chunks. And I really think that's the key to why this comes out so good. But anyway, the point is we're going to mix this very thoroughly. And we're not going to stop until we're at least 95% sure that that is 100% mixed. And then once that's set, what we'll do is wrap it up and pop it in the fridge to marinate for at least 4 hours, or up to overnight, which might be even better. But either way, at that point we can pull it out, and we'll begin to impale it on a metal skewer. And for most of these pieces, I'm going to pierce them twice, which means we're basically folding them in half. But for some of the longer pieces, we can actually pierce them in 3 spots for like a double fold. And then for some of the smaller pieces, we will just skewer those ones through the center with no fold. So really, the size and length of the meat will dictate what you should do. And don't overthink it. Just let your fingers take over. They'll know what's up. And all we're trying to achieve as we weave this meat on is some relatively consistent girth as we work our way towards the point. And if we end up with any little long straggly pieces like that, we'll just go ahead and wrap them around and tuck them in. And we do want these pieces of meat pretty snug to each other and pressed pretty well together, but not super tight. And yes, I'm putting a ton on here. I'm going to get like 1 pound on each skewer, which is by design. I want these nice and thick. And that's it. That is a pretty nice looking pork skewer with just a ton of surface area and a ridiculous amount of nooks and crannies, which of course means more flavor and caramelization and smoky goodness. And if we want, we could just pop these in the fridge until we're ready to grill. But I was ready. So I placed those over some Japanese style charcoal, which is like my new favorite thing. And as you can see, they just barely fit on. And of course, I'm going to edit this down and not show you all the twists and turns. Since start to finish, this took me about 40 minutes. But you know the drill. We're going to cook these turning as often as we feel like, until they are cooked to our desired doneness. Which if you're using pork shoulder, I'd go to about 160 internal temp. But if you're doing pork loin, I would not go much past 140, since that is a lot leaner and it can dry out. But regardless of what you used, once we think that's close to being done, we're going to finish by glazing these things with the barbecue sauce of our choice. And of course, one of the keys here is not to do this too soon. Since that sauce is only going to take a couple minutes per side to glaze on, and if your meat's not cooked, your sauce might be black by the time it is. All right, we've all been there. So that's something you're definitely going to want to pay attention to. Oh, and speaking of doneness, I sort of lost track of time, and it was a lot later than I thought. And I was afraid I was going to lose the good light to get my final shots. So I actually sauced mine before they were really cooked as far as they should have been. And I did end up pulling these off slightly undercooked. Not like dangerously, but when you use pork shoulder, you really do want to give it enough time for that heat to get through that fat and connective tissue so that that texture firms up and it's not too chewy. But anyway, it was close enough. So I pulled it off and headed inside. And I went ahead and garnished with a few sliced green onions. For the pictures, of course. And after taking a few of those, I went ahead and pulled off a piece and gave it a try. And it really was fantastic. Right, that slicing and marinating with a dry rub technique really produces a ton of flavor, which is why I quickly grabbed a second piece. And I enjoyed that one just as much. But I'm not a complete savage, so I went ahead and pulled some meat off the skewer and drizzled over a little extra barbecue sauce. And in case you're keeping score at home, that is a cold egg noodle salad, which was amazing and I really should film that. But anyway, I grabbed a fork and knife and dug in like a real gentleman. And it really was incredible, which is why it's so upsetting I didn't give it that extra 10 minutes I should have. All right, there's a certain point where that meat firms up, and then your teeth are able to cut cleanly through the meat and not just sort of crush it. Which, by the way, because it's so much leaner, you are not going to have a problem with the pork loin. Right there, all you're worrying about is not overcooking it. But if you're going for all this extra flavor from the fat and connective tissue in a pork shoulder, like I said, you really want to try to get up to about 160. But anyway, I'm going to stop complaining now, because this really was incredibly delicious. And I really do love this technique. So the next time you're craving barbecue pork and you just don't feel like doing ribs or pulling a pork shoulder, this is what I think you should make. Right, on one hand, this seems like a very familiar barbecue pork experience. But on the other, it really is quite different. And I think a wonderful change of pace. Which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.